But for now, I want to bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tyab. He is following the latest on this story from Kyiv this hour. Imtiaz, I know you've been getting some reaction online. Folks there, many of them obviously still sleeping this morning. But what are you seeing in terms of reaction this hour?
Chanel, it's around 9 p.m. here in Kyiv. You can imagine most people aren't really watching TV, but news is starting to trickle in. In fact, we were on the phone with a well-known Ukrainian journalist earlier, and we caught her at the grocery store, and she said, "You have to excuse me, I'm crying." And that, I think, really just sums up the mood here in Ukraine, which is a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dread as to what may come next. You know, many people woke up this morning with a little bit of hope. They heard from President Trump where he was kind of walking back his false allegation that Volodymyr Zelenskyy was, in his words, a dictator. Again, a false allegation. He is a democratically elected leader here in Ukraine. He has pretty good approval ratings in this country. And here we are, this extraordinary scene, again, on a day when many Ukrainians had thought Mr. Zelenskyy was going to go there, sign a deal with President Trump, and potentially turn a page, start a new relationship with this new president that will hopefully, in their view, also end this war, but not on Vladimir Putin's terms. And now that is something that many people here, I would imagine, are not believing is going to happen. And we have to consider this, Chanel. This is a country for the last 3 years has suffered so brutally. We have to consider tens of thousands of people have been killed. 6 million people are abroad living as refugees. Millions are internal refugees. And there are many more people who have suffered wounds that have changed their lives. And there are many more who suffer internal wounds and indeed have lost their homes. Russia occupies 20% of this country. This is a country which has suffered so much pain, so much agony. They want the war to end. But again, not on Vladimir Putin's terms, and many fear that's exactly what's unfolding this evening.
And Imtiaz, you know, based on your reporting there in Ukraine, can you speak about how Vladimir Putin may have watched this moment and interpreted that exchange between the president here in the U.S., President Trump, and Zelenskyy?
It's a really important question, Chanel, and the short answer is that Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin are no doubt reacting with glee at, frankly, that spectacle that we saw at the White House. Again, we've been using the word unprecedented to see a president and a vice president with a world leader in the Oval Office with a huge crowd of journalists around them, and the kind of exchange that we saw. And of course, we now know Mr. Zelenskyy has left. That deal was not signed. And it really just underscores, I think, from the point of view of Vladimir Putin and indeed the Kremlin, that this is exactly what they want. They want to see Volodymyr Zelenskyy isolated. They don't want to be isolated. They want to come out into the world. They want to be welcomed back to the fold in a way that it seems like President Trump is. Remember, not that long ago, there were face-to-face talks in Saudi Arabia between U.S. officials and Russian officials. Not there was Ukraine. Not there were European partners. And it really just feels like this momentum is building in the direction of Vladimir Putin, who, it must be clear, started this war. Not just 3 years ago, but back in 2014, when he annexed Crimea, occupied large sections of the Donbass, and then restarted the war 3 years ago, and the devastation that we've seen ever since. As you rightly point out, I've been reporting on this war almost nonstop for that 3 years, and the devastation we've seen is unspeakable. But very quickly, Chanel, what I do want to say, there was something that really struck me in that exchange, which was Volodymyr Zelenskyy was accused of not being grateful. I've been covering Ukraine for a long time, and since this invasion that was led by Vladimir Putin, I have never met a group of people, or a country, or a nation more grateful for U.S. support than Ukrainians. I mean it, more grateful than Ukrainians. And for them to be in this moment where this country, which they've become to rely on so much, the United States of America, to suddenly take this turn, I think for many Ukrainians tonight, it is not only a sense of dread and confusion, but also deep, deep sadness. Chanel.
I'm glad you picked up on that point, Imtiaz, because there was a lot of talk during that conversation about the amount and type of U.S. support for Ukraine in the last couple of years. Because you have boots on the ground there, I wonder if you can speak to what all that support looks like on the ground in Ukraine, and whether there are now any concerns that that could be threatened.
Yeah, that is the ultimate concern here, Chanel, is that all of this support that has been received, not just from the U.S., and it has to be clear, President Trump has very greatly exaggerated the dollar figure, for lack of a better phrase, of what the U.S. has provided Ukraine. Still, it's in the many, many, many billions of dollars. It's not nothing. But when you consider the fact that the U.S. has provided Ukraine with things like long-range missiles, aircraft, anti-aircraft devices as well, which has really helped Ukraine to repel Russia's drone strikes. In fact, from Saturday of last week up until the day before yesterday, Russia launched some of the largest drone and missile strikes across Ukraine that we've seen since the start of this war. This is a very active conflict, and the support from the U.S., the military support from the U.S., and the diplomatic support from the U.S. has allowed this, frankly, David and Goliath battle, David, of course, being Ukraine, to stand up to the might and the power of Russia in the way that they have could not have been done without the support of the U.S., could not have been done without the support of Europe. And so the fact that there's a possibility that the kind of support we've been seeing from the U.S. may vanish very quickly, that spreads a lot of doom and dread here in Ukraine for people who are at this moment on the front line fighting against Russia.
And Imtiaz, there was another really heated moment where Zelenskyy was trying to tell President Donald Trump that if Ukraine fell, it would have a global impact. Talk about what would happen if the U.S. were to pull support for Ukraine here. What kind of impact we could see, especially immediately in Europe?
Look, the fear is that Vladimir Putin will take over all of Ukraine. He's made it very clear he sees Ukraine as part of Russia. He had this big manifesto at the start of the war where he reasoned as to why he thought Ukraine was part of Russia, and he was well within his right to take over this country. But it's bigger than that, because there are other former Soviet countries that Vladimir Putin may potentially see as rightfully part of Russia. And what if he attacks them? And more importantly, what if Vladimir Putin attacks a NATO country? NATO, of course, is that transatlantic alliance that the U.S. is part of, that Europe is part of, and they have a rule, which is an attack on one country that belongs to NATO is an attack on all of NATO. And so does that mean that the nightmare scenario, which so many people have been trying to prevent, which is all of Europe at war with Russia, is that more likely now than it was just a few hours ago? We don't know the answer to that question, but that is the fear, and the repercussions of what we just saw in the White House could potentially be very, very far-reaching and wide-ranging.
Okay, Imtiaz Tyab live for us in Kyiv this hour. Thank you.